Caution: some of the descriptions in this episode may be suitable for boat geeks only. If you're new to this podcast, I'd recommend starting with episode 1 at hownottosail.com/1. A week in the blazing sun. $1,000 worth of materials, some of which may or may not be the right stuff for the job. What could possibly go wrong? How Not to Sail, sponsored by our awesome Patreon patrons and Latitudes and Attitudes magazine. They ruin my life, so why not let them ruin yours today at latsats.com. Herman Melville had quite a way with words. I wonder if you can relate to these words from near the beginning of Moby Dick.
Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship.
It was Willie what got drowned in the deep blue sea.
In my case, I needed something simple and tangible to work on for a few days, alone. And JC Sails needed some TLC. The white gel coat on the cabin top and in the cockpit had been turning to powder for years, to the point that whenever we'd sit in the cockpit or on the cabin top, our clothes would look like we'd been touring a chalk factory. In some places, the bare fiberglass of the boat peeked through where the gel coat had completely worn off. Also, everywhere the teak eyebrows above the port lights were screwed in was a potential entry point for water to get into the wooden core of the cabin. Ditto for the teak handrails on the cabin top where they were screwed in. And as I discovered for the port lights already, wood plus water equals bad. For a long time, when I'd return to the vessel, I would find brown stains on the galley countertop, which I attributed to rainwater making its way through the cabin top via those damn screw holes. Besides the fact that the upper part of the boat looked like shit, I was worried the cabin top might start to rot within its fiberglass skin. Work needed to be done, and I needed to work with my hands. The forecast showed a string of days with a low chance of rain, so I figured this was my chance to make some progress. I didn't think of this as a substitute for throwing myself on my sword like Cato, but there were times under the blazing sun when the former seemed preferable. And when I discovered how much work the wrong advice had cost me, it's probably a good thing I didn't have pistol and ball handy. I came down on a Thursday, best I recall, and spent the next day consulting with Maxie, who was in Cairo, on the final edits and mixes for episode 22 of the podcast. Then I took Cliff and Laureen sailing on Saturday, and one more solo sail for good measure on Sunday. I figured those outings would be my only time on the water this trip, and I was right. First thing Monday, I set out for the local distributor for all things fiberglass, resin, and boat paint, who shall remain nameless for now, as they are generally a decent place to purchase There at the distributor, a helpful fellow provided me with epoxy resin, fumed silica filler, and a tiny container of catalyst, 2 expensive quart cans, which when mixed purported to make primer paint, and a fair number of plastic quart paint buckets, little plastic cups, which looked the right size for a urine sample, cheap wooden tongue depressors for stirring small batches of resin, and whatnot. Back at the boat, the first brilliant thing I did, no, seriously, was lower my expectations. Not of the quality of the outcome, but of how much I might be able to get done. In the end, I did get her done, but not without help. And it still took 9 days. What I decided was focus on just one thing: getting the cabin top leak-free and painting the white parts. The hard part was deciding what exactly was cabin top and where to cut it off. I decided to attack any white parts of the cabin top itself, plus any exterior vertical surfaces of the cockpit coaming that rose up from deck level. In other words, which parts can other people see which currently make us look like vagabonds? If I could actually complete just those parts, I'd be happy. The cockpit interior, where we'd still be getting white gel coat powder all over our clothes, and the gray non-skid areas on the cabin top and side decks, would have to wait. The first thing I did was remove the teak eyebrows above the windows, or port lights, permanently, and the handrails on the cabin top, temporarily. I mixed some of the resin stuff with some of the fumed silica stuff and some catalyst, wear a mask, and after stirring it well, started filling in where the screw holes were for the teak eyebrows. No, wait, I think I sanded and wiped everything with acetone first. There was a lot of sanding and a lot of wiping things down with acetone. Anyway, I applied just enough resin to fill the screw holes and any spider cracks emanating from them, and scraped the excess resin flat with a little piece of plastic, so there'd be minimal resin to sand later. Then I did the thing which I'm still waiting to see if it will work. I wanted to keep the cabin top handrails, but without water leaking through the screw holes. So what I did was to carefully drill some bigger holes right where the old screw holes were. Substantially bigger. Then I filled the holes with the epoxy filler stuff, squeezing the mixture into the holes with a syringe. The thinking was this: I'd paint the cabin top, then replace the teak handrails, but this time they'd be screwed into solid epoxy resin. First, though, I'd need to drill some new pilot holes or else the resin would crack. I haven't put the handrails back on yet, and didn't drill the pilot holes. Since I had to leave the boat, having a nice watertight cabin top is better than having one with a bunch of new pilot holes drilled in it. Okay, here's where the pistol and ball threatened to make their presence known. After letting the resin cure overnight, I sanded everywhere I'd filled in cracks and screw holes and wiped them again with acetone. Then I opened up the 2 quart cans of, quote, primer components and started to stir them up. One of the 2 cans was particularly hard to stir. The top layer was kind of a brown liquid, and the rest of the can was like peanut butter, but much thicker. The other can contained some kind of white base, according to the label. It wasn't as hard to mix, but still could use some help. And the can of brown stuff would take all day. I felt like my paint stick would snap at any moment trying to mix the damn stuff. I called the distributor and asked if they could shake up the cans in a paint shaker. It was a 20-minute drive to the distributor, but I figured that was better than trying to take the stuff into Home Depot. At the distributor, nobody commented on the 2 cans I brought in, or why they didn't shake them up to begin with, or why I was even using those 2 particular products in the same job. Yeah, you see where this is going. Back at the boat, I mixed up a small batch of primer from the 2 quart containers and started to work. The mixture in the little plastic paint bucket looked whiter than I'd expected from the components, but it took on an unfortunate beige or dun tone as I painted it onto the cabin top. It was also thicker than I expected and really showed the brush marks. Still, I finished the port side of the cabin top and figured I'd finish primering the following day. Since I figured the first quarts of each component, at $60 each, wouldn't be enough, I headed back to the distributor the next morning with my receipt so I could be sure to get the exact same 2 products. And that's when the proverbial human waste product hit the spinning air-moving device. Guy number 1 from before wasn't there, so I spoke with guy number 2. Besides buying more stuff, I wanted to confirm that everything was normal with my results. The brown color, the thickness, the obvious brush strokes. Guy number 2 had a fit. "I don't know why in the hell he sold you this shit," he bellowed. Then he launched into a tirade. How guy number 1 was on great terms with the higher-ups, but didn't know what he was doing. How guy number 1 constantly ignored guy number 2's instructions on which things go together. On and on it went. And then he gave me this news. "You're gonna have to scrape all that stuff off and start over. It's never gonna cure," he told me. "It'll probably be on there like tar." Okay, maybe it'll cure and you can sand it off, but you might as well go back, try to start scraping it off, and let me know how it goes. Then guy number 2 started to outline a couple of different options on what products to use after I'd removed the first stuff, which, after the gratuitous diatribe against his coworker, only served to further overload my brain. Okay, I'm just gonna go start scraping before I buy anything else," I told him, backing carefully away. I did not just start scraping, though. I located the number to the All Grip rep for the region, who returned my call quickly. "I just wanted to run this by you since I don't trust my sanity at this point," I told him. He confirmed that the 2 products I'd been sold to mix as primer do not go together. Officially. After a minute, he did allow that some people do actually use the mixture on purpose and call it high five, which is absolutely not recommended by All Grip. And I can see why. So after checking on the, quote, primer, finding it was dry and sandable, I made an executive decision. Well, almost. First, I called my friend Rick over. He did a little sanding too and thought it was workable. "It's actually sanding really nice," he said. "Okay, I've decided," I said. "I'm going to finish priming with this stuff. I don't want to try to strip it off, and I don't want to do something completely different on the other side." "I'll help you with the sanding," Rick said. Man, was that an unwise offer. I went back to the distributor and bought more of the wrong stuff, on purpose. "This time, let's shake it up," I said. "And let's go ahead and get the top coat paint and shake that up too." I'd made up my mind. With Rick's very kind help, I was going to finish the priming and sanding and, weather permitting, get some actual all-grip cloud white top coat paint on the boat. It was starting to look dicey. The forecast called for possible afternoon rains, and I had to return to Atlanta pretty soon regardless. I finished priming the starboard side that day, and then spent 2 days, with Rick's help, sanding, and sanding, and sanding. I couldn't believe Rick's perseverance and generosity. "Couldn't get it done without you," I'd say. "Well, I kind of enjoy it," he'd say. "You're a strange fella, but I appreciate it greatly," I'd say. The high five concoction was ridiculously thick and hard to sand. Did I mention it was hot? I went through a gallon of water a day before beer. Being surrounded by all those white boats all day long with a mostly cloudless sky was quite special, as my drummer friend Daryl might say. Finally, on the Monday a week after I started this mess, I surveyed the sky and the forecast and had Rick take a look at the cabin top. I could keep going on this, I said, but I think we may be at a point of diminishing returns. I think you're right, he said. This ought to do pretty well. So I got to work applying the actual top coat. It was pretty sweet right off the bat. And now, instead of that crazy dun-colored mess, a nice white cabin top began to appear. And I finally figured out how to tip and roll with brush and roller, and got faster at it. Also, after learning my lesson with the primer coat, I taped off everything I didn't want white paint on, like hatches and other hardware. This, like filling in the cracks, priming, and sanding, was time-consuming, but must be done if you want the end result to look good. I managed to get a top coat on everything that Monday, but would it rain in the evening? And would that mess up the paint job? And would I be able to get a second coat on Tuesday? I had to drive home Wednesday, so it would be what it would be. It did not rain. Tuesday, I finished up by early afternoon. The accelerator seemed to be working well, and by late afternoon, the second coat seemed dry enough that maybe I could take off the painter's tape without messing anything up. Hopefully. I gingerly pulled up the blue strips of tape, starting with the parts I'd painted earliest in the day, and it was beautiful. No, it doesn't look like gel coat. It's paint. But it's pretty awesome paint. For a change, now the cabin top looks like something we can be proud of. Well, except for the eroding non-skid and the missing handrails, which I still need to reattach the next time I quietly take to the ship, as Melville would say.
Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. It was Willie what got drowned in the deep blue sea.
Join me next time when I reckon we'll probably talk about the last storm that came through the marina, whatever that one was called. Don't forget to check out the show notes at hownottasail.com/25. And heck, leave me a comment while you're there. I love to hear from you. Thanks as always to our awesome Patreon crew and Latitudes and Attitudes magazine. They ruin my life, so why not let them ruin yours today at latsats.com. Special thanks to Maxie Freeney for mixing this episode. You can find him at maxifreeney.com. That's MAXIFRINI. Oh, and actually, I just remembered, I put a little Easter egg in the transcript in the show notes. So the third person that goes to hownottasail.com/25, check out the transcript there and let me know what interesting thing I incorporated into the transcript. Well, interesting to me anyway. And I'll send you a How Not to Sail t-shirt. Again, that's for the third person to let me know in the comments for this episode what interesting thing is incorporated into the transcript. And I'll give you a hint, it has to do with the beginning and end of this episode. Just scroll down to the bottom of the page at hownottasail.com/25 and you'll see the place to comment. Be sure and include your name and email. Unless I'm having a senior moment, the email will not be published on the page. But I would need to contact you if you are the t-shirt winner. And you can always find all things How Not to Sail at hownottasail.com. Remember to check that fuel gauge before you go out. Not that I'm speaking from experience. And I'll see you next time on How Not to Sail. Screwing up is part of cruising. Let me show you how.
Okay then. If that's not it, it ain't it.